Welcome to How's Your Represence? I am Mark Galvin, your host for this wonderful show, and we are produced by ePresence. We're so glad you are with us today. This is such a great time of the year. The trees are turning green. Actually, the trees are already green here in Atlanta and probably the part of the world that you're in, depending on the hemisphere you're in. You're probably seeing the trees turn a little more green where you are. Absolutely wonderful part. The pollen here in the southeast got a little ugly this year, but it's on the way out, so it's really, really beautiful. We are always thrilled that you're with us today, and we're going to talk about some great things that are really timely. We're going to talk about cybersecurity today, so stick around so you can see our guest because he is absolutely terrific. We love that you're here today. What do we do on this show? We are a show that likes to talk about how to do things a little better in either social media, in digital, or in cybersecurity even. So feel free to join us in on the conversation. If you have a question, you can just drop it right into the chat box wherever you are. Feel free to drop those those questions right there in that chat box, and we will serve them up, if you will, right to our guest. Also, wherever you are, we'd love for you to subscribe. So look for that subscribe button there on the screen. You want to subscribe to either Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter because they'll let you know when we go live. And when we do go live, it gives you a chance to, well, you can throw a question at our guest and become a part of the show. So love for you to look for that. Look at right on the screen, and you should be able to track those things down. So what are we going to talk about today? Specifically, I already teased you on cybersecurity. We're going to talk about the right way to do cybersecurity and get into things like the biggest cybersecurity issues for businesses. Maybe we'll get into cybersecurity insurance. And what about the Ukrainian war? Is there anything there that we should be worrying about here in the US? And when you watch the news, it seems like could be all at least, a target for those cybersecurity concerns. So just a reminder, wherever you are, we would love for you to ask us questions as they come up. Or just drop a little note wherever you are in the chat box. Let us know. Are you joining us from El Paso? Are you joining us from San Francisco? Just let us know what part of the country you're tuning in from, and that'll give us a good sense of how great our audience is. Well, let me tell you about our guest today. Our guest today is Keyaan Williams. He is the CEO, leader, and extraordinaire with CLASS-LLC. He is a cyber leader and actually CLASS-LLC stands for Cyber Leadership and Strategy Solutions LLC. As he told me before the show, he came out of government. And so everything in government is an acronym. And of course, he created his own acronym. He has managed large security programs, primarily here in the Southeast with the CDC. He's also the chair of the Cyber Strategy Retreat Advisory Board. I've done some work and I have rubbed elbows with Keyaan from time to time. And I just want you to know, he really is someone that knows what he's talking about. Stick around. I know you're going to see something new. And this is something that we're always thinking about on small businesses or businesses in general. Cybersecurity is so important. So I think you'll find this very interesting. Great. I think I have waxed on eloquently long enough. Let's see if we can find Keyaan over there. He's back in the green room, probably sipping some tea. Let's see. There he is. Keyaan, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well.
I am so glad that you could join us today. I hit the wrong button. That's the button I want. I am so glad that you're able to join us today. You and I have talked a lot of times. In fact, you have a show or an event or a convention where you gather a bunch of people together. You've done this online. You do it on purpose. Share a little bit about that. I think that that's really interesting.
Sure. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. And in the beginning of my career, I used to be the guy that had a security background. I'd go to the security conference, and the preaching to the choir was really the name of the game. And so I stepped back and thought about it and said, it would be really interesting for all of these security people who are saying that our counterparts in IT don't know what they're talking about, who are saying that the business just doesn't understand. There are all these disparaging remarks about other people in an organization, that I create an event that brings everybody together so that IT and business people and even board members can stand up for themselves and say, no, actually, you think that you have all the answers, but you're missing a couple of things. The outcome of that for businesses is that there's a lot more collaboration and everybody understands better what the other parts of the business are doing. For individuals, you have much more insight about what really works and what doesn't work. And very often there are things that people have overlooked that they're exposed to by having those conversations. So we've done 7 conferences. We do
7.
online events.
7. Yeah.
Yeah. I started in Cupertino in 2019. And like a crazy person, I did a brand new conference that nobody had ever heard of in Silicon Valley, in Atlanta, and in Boston. So it was very expensive getting it off the ground. But since then, I've had about 5,000 people who have participated in what is really a small event. I've never had more than 200 people at a single event. But over the course of the last couple of years, doing online conferences, hybrid events, monthly webinars, executive roundtables where we sit down and have dinner, and even the summit and a 4-day executive retreat that I do at the Broadmoor in Colorado, there are numerous opportunities to bring diverse backgrounds together and have everybody talk about the solution to the cybersecurity problem.
That is so cool. Well, you do so many great things in addition to this conference. How did you get into cybersecurity? How did, that's just not something you happenstance upon. How did you end up in this space?
You say you don't happenstance upon it, but I'm in cybersecurity because of a car accident. So
no way. I don't think I've heard this story. Tell me more.
So once upon a time, I used to unload tractor trailers for a living. And so I would get up at 3 a.m, get dressed. I'd be at the facility by 5 o'clock. I'm unloading trailers all morning. We clock out at about noon. And when I was doing this, I was also enrolling to go to college. And so my boss let me use his truck to drive up to the dorms. I was so sleepy that I ran through a red light and ripped the front bumper off this lady's car. Now, mind you, this was back in the day. There were no cell phones. I wasn't wealthy enough to walk around with the phone in a briefcase. The best that I had was a pager, and there was no damage to my boss's car. So I said, ma'am, if you follow me to my dorms, you'll see where I live. We can write down all the information, whatever it takes to make you whole. I will spend the money that I've saved up all summer to honor my commitment to your car being restored. And so everything worked out well. Because of my commitment to integrity, she got me a job at the Georgia World Congress Center. Back then they called it a cable monkey. So I literally crawled through the rafters at the Georgia World Congress Center Authority, pulling out old network cables and installing new cables. But I was whistling while I was working. I was having a good time. And the outcome of that is that I ended up working on the help desk. From the help desk, I end up working in, system administration and bigger IT things. And after I came back from being in the Army, because that was temporary, but I enlisted in the Army, served as a chemical weapons specialist. When I came back, because of the IT experience, I was able to get on the help desk at the CDC. And on the help desk, I discovered that there are a lot more IT people than there are security people, transitioned into cybersecurity, and the rest has been history. But I literally can pinpoint, I'm doing what I'm doing today because of the grace of God and because somebody allowed me to honor my commitment to give her cash to fix her car, because there was no exchange of insurance information. I couldn't even find the insurance card.
Oh my goodness. There's one thing that you said. Now, I spent a few days at the Georgia World Congress Center. I work at the Omni Hotel for many years, so I don't need to say more to you. You get that. And you're not a little guy. I mean, this is not that's not a slight. I mean, you are a well, let's put it this way. If I was walking around with you and some guy wanted to take me on, I would probably push you first. Because you're certainly you look a lot stronger than me. That's really what it all comes down to. And to hear you running around the rafters, that's pretty phenomenal. I'm amazed at that.
Yeah, just remember, it's not my size, it's my skill. The Army trained me well, and I used to kickbox to stay in shape. I'm
Oh
also
my.
about 70 pounds heavier now than I was when I was a more fit person.
Oh, okay. Crawling through the rafters. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
You were a little, you're a few pounds lighter. Well, that is really cool. I did not know that you had spent some time at the Georgia World Congress Center. That is really cool. Well, I'm ready to dig into some good stuff. You ready to get into cybersecurity?
It is my favorite topic. I'm looking forward to sharing.
This is your sweet spot. Well, I love to hear that. So you have said to me before, most people are doing cybersecurity wrong. What is the right way to do cybersecurity?
So, Mark, I'm going to tell you that I am so convicted about that statement that most people are doing cybersecurity wrong, that that is the working title for a book that I'm going to write.
Oh,
So,
really?
yes, yes. So I'm working with a great writing coach to pull all the thoughts together, but I think it'll be a good work and it'll be business oriented, so the audience can look forward to seeing something that's fun to read. But if we talk about the wrong way to do cybersecurity, I think what people are doing wrong is throwing technology at the problem. Academically, when people
Yeah.
talk about cybersecurity, they say it's a combination of people, process, and technology. But then when you look in the marketplace, cybersecurity is a $1 trillion industry, but it's $1 trillion worth of technology that, for the most part, people don't implement correctly. Or if it's implemented correctly, they don't maintain it, they don't update it. And then there are no people because you spent all your money on technology. And so I would argue that the right way to do things is to have a good balance of critical technology, qualified people, and then formal documented processes. And for the audience, I'll give a good example. According to the FBI's crime reports, $2.4 billion was the amount of losses from a cybersecurity attack called business email compromise. Now, that data is from
Unbelievable.
2021, but that is a lot of money. And most of the companies that were subject to those attacks satisfied the regulatory requirements. They had basic security controls in place. But what business email compromise does is it leverages weaknesses in people and processes. And so when I say that people are doing it wrong, I can say that with conviction because if I were incorrect, people wouldn't lose $2.4 billion a year because the bad guys are overcoming people and process, even given that trillions of dollars are spent on technology.
That is just incredible to me. I trying to wrap my head around what $2.4 billion of losses looks like. It, there is this hidden threat, and that's what cybersecurity is. It's like a hidden threat, right? If someone is going to potentially rob my house, there's a physical aspect to that. I have a chance I could see them coming. I could lock my door. It's very physical. Cybersecurity is one of those things. It's not something you can see, but yet this unknown, unseeable thing can come in and attack my system and cost me money. What is like you look at a company? Well, actually, this is interesting. There's a guy that he's in. Um, this gentleman, Steven Eisenstein, runs he installs tents here in Atlanta. So he's a tent rental company. So if you were to look at Stephen, and Stephen, thank you for your comment. If you were to look at Stephen and his company, what is the threat what's his exposure in cybersecurity where he should be aware of?
Well, most companies have data, and the priority for cybersecurity, when you really get down to the brass tacks, is the processes that you use to have an inventory of all of your data so that you know what you have, where it exists, and how important it is, to make sure that you have the data organized in containers based on how
Huh.
critical it is. Like under ideal circumstances, you don't want your critical data to be in the same bucket with things that you don't care about so that you can focus on the most important items. And then it's thinking about the people, process, and technology that are going to protect that data. And so, even for Stephen, what I assume without having talked to him and not knowing anything about him before this conversation, I would assume that he has a customer list. he probably uses other service providers to support his business. There could be things that if you were accounting for it in QuickBooks, it would be billed to operations, but
Yep.
those providers that you're using may have access to your systems, or they may send you emails that you trust that are coming from somebody that you know and that you've done business with. But if somebody compromises your service provider and they send you an email and says, "Hey, Stephen, click this link so that you can get the recent invoice for the service that I provided," and it really wasn't Stephen's service provider, but it's somebody who compromised his service provider, figured out who the service provider works with, and then sent malicious messages to all of those people, Stephen could be compromised simply by clicking on an email from somebody that he thought he knew.
Yep. Yep.
Then you click on that email, the attacker gets access to banking information, to customer information, and the more information the attacker has access to, the more expensive it is to provide remediation and solve the problem. Also, the more it damages your reputation. You know, it wouldn't be a big deal if, say, for instance, that I was Stephen's customer, I received a message from him that attacker sent on his behalf, and I was compromised as one individual. You can deal with losing one customer, but imagine that Stephen has a customer database of 10,000 people. You know, people who have been to events, that have subscribed to the marketing messages. There is a lot of harm that comes to a business where 10,000 people receive a malicious email from the attacker versus just one person. And so even for a business that isn't running an e-commerce solution, they don't have an online store, you know, they're setting up tents for great events, I assume that there's probably a large ecosystem of people involved in that business, and all of the data that's involved in the operations of that business is what I would focus on protecting from a cybersecurity perspective.
There is a something interesting that I went through just recently. I had a business address change, and I found that even though I changed my address on the invoice that I was sending all the clients, all business people are like shaking their like, yeah, of course. You change your address on the invoice, the client doesn't see it. They've got it built in their system, and they're just firing off, and they're just mailing checks to the address that's built into their system. So I created a list of all the clients that send me checks, and I was sending them an email. And the first person I sent the email to sent me a note back and said, "You need to confirm you're you." And I thought that was brilliant, right?
Excellent.
Because they have evidently been through that sort of, someone could have hacked another vendor, and the vendor says, "Oh, your checks need to come to that address now." And so I thought that was great, which made me shift gears, and I started sending proof that I was the right person and that I'd be happy to get on a phone call, and made it easier for them to connect with us. That brings up a question that, and we have and actually I do have another question, but before I ask the next question on my list, what about people who use QuickBooks Online? So I'm thinking, I have so much data that's sitting there in that cloud. As a cybersecurity threat, if somebody were to get into that, I'm in trouble. What should I do as a business owner to protect that asset?
So I would say that all of the cloud assets that you're using, the number one thing that you can do is turn on multi-factor authentication.
Good. Okay.
I have a great example for you, as a matter of fact.
Good.
So in the news, it's been within the last 30 days. There was a big news story in cybersecurity news. Regular people may not have heard about it, but HubSpot had a cyber incident. Customer data was exposed because an employee within HubSpot was capturing data about people that were involved in cryptocurrency. And so it was an attack. It was not an attack from the outside. It was not a direct attack against the companies that were using HubSpot. It was an employee inside of HubSpot who had access to the environment, who abused his access to look at who are all the people that are customers of these cryptocurrency companies. And cryptocurrency was a specific industry that was targeted. And you think about all the information you have in your CRM, that individual was able to send phishing messages and other fake messages to people, knowing what they were interested in, what they subscribed to, the companies that they worked with, which increases the likelihood that people were clicking on links and bad things that were happening.
Wow.
And so then it begs the question, do I stop using HubSpot, or Salesforce or the other CRM solutions that I use to run my business. And
Well, and you talked
realistically,
about branding, right? This is, I hear this, and this is going to hurt their brand because HubSpot is a CRM company, and makes me wonder, gosh, if I'm a HubSpot client, does that person have access to my data? And I know it's a whole nother rabbit hole, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. So anyway, keep going. I just think that's fascinating.
but this is what happens for companies from the cybersecurity perspective, though.
Right.
Multi-factor authentication ensures that only authorized people have access to your data, even if you're using HubSpot. And so when you look at the recommendations, if the companies that were affected had used all the security features that HubSpot makes available, the issue would not have been an issue. It would have been prevented. There's an option in
Interesting.
HubSpot to say that only employees have access to the data in the repository. And if HubSpot is performing help desk or customer service, you have to push a button for the HubSpot employee to have access to your data. What tends to happen is most people just leave the data open, and then you are exposing yourself to people with bad intentions who might be employees of the companies that you're using. And then it takes us back to QuickBooks. I'm a security person. I run a professional services company. It's easier for me to use QuickBooks than to do it the old school way with
Do
a
you use
ledger.
QuickBooks too?
Yeah, I use
Okay.
QuickBooks Online. I mean, I have a CPA firm that I work with. Accountants from the CPA firm have access to my QuickBooks, but I, as the owner of the account, control the amount of access that they have. So I'm
Right.
the only person that has full access. My wife is a backup in case I'm incapacitated, so that she can get into the business banking accounts.
In
My
case you get stuck crawling through the ducks at the Georgia World Congress Center. I hear you.
Yes, or on some other adventure. But it's always good to have a backup that can log into your critical accounts.
Sure.
But then for everybody else, it makes much more sense to limit their access to only what is absolutely necessary. The issue with HubSpot, too much access for people that didn't need it. The same thing happens with QuickBooks. The same thing happens with Google Cloud, with Amazon Cloud, and with Microsoft Cloud. A lot of your public data breaches exist because people didn't configure their cloud solutions properly, not because the cloud is inherently insecure. There's a difference between using the tools that are available and not turning on things that are going to reduce the risk that you have.
Yeah, that's a great point. We had a client today, as a matter of fact. They had changed their password on their social media. And by the way, we're in the social media business, Keyaan. Did you know that?
I've heard something about that.
So anyway, we had a client who changed their password on their social media. Totally cool. Happens all the time. And we couldn't get in, and we just said, "No, hey, do us a favor. We have a secure portal to plug in passwords." And he went out and changed his password, and he sent us an email. He said, "Hey, here's my new password." And I replied back, "Can you please use the portal?" And he did, in fact, go back and change his password again and use the portal. And here is my concern: is he copied the entire company on those passwords. And all the people that got it are great people, not a question at all. I'm not worried about those folks at all. But what if one of them forwarded an email to someone else and it happened and that password was, buried in the trail? So it is amazing. We have to be diligent about where those passwords go and how they're shared. All right, I'm looking at the time. We got 6 minutes left in this segment. I do have one more question. You want to recap something real quick before I ask the next question?
Nope. We'll keep moving forward.
All right. I had a feeling this was going to happen. We have so much to talk about. The next one I want to throw at you is, what is the number one cybersecurity concern? Did you talk about that? That didn't come up in the first thing. What's that big thing? And you're probably going to say what was it? What'd you bring up? Multi-factor authentication, something like that. But
well, if we're going to label it a concern, the number one concern is misconfigured technology.
Okay.
85% of targeted attacks are using compromised credentials. And so most of the bad guys are just harvesting every credential they can get from every data breach. And then there's a technical term called credential stuffing, where they just point every username and password they could find at whatever they're trying to log into. And 9 times out of 10, because people reuse passwords and because a lot of people aren't using multi-factor authentication, bad guys get in using credential stuffing as a solution. So having security solutions and configuring them properly, as I said before, are two different things. So it's somewhat of a recap, but I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that you have an inventory of all your solutions, to make sure that they're configured properly, to make sure that they're up to date. Mark, I'm sure that you've seen things about SSL versus TLS when you start getting into network security.
Right.
The internet almost shut down when they turned off SSL as the old version of internet encryption and then transitioned over to TLS because people did not heed any of the warnings that the old version was going away because it was insecure. And so staying on top of what do I have? Have I patched my computer? Have I patched my software? Is everything up to date? The more you keep your systems and your solutions configured correctly, patched properly, and up to date, the more you're reducing your risk. So much so that the Australian Signals Directorate, which is the group that does cybersecurity for Australia at a national level, did a research paper in conjunction with Canada and the United States. And they found that 85% of your risk is reduced by removing administrative privileges where they don't need to exist, by only allowing authorized software to run in the environment, and by applying patches and updates to your computer solutions in a timely manner. And so now we've reduced everything down to 15%, which becomes manageable for every business owner, even if you don't have a full service security provider, and even if you don't have full-time employees that are doing this kind of work on your behalf.
This is very interesting. So you mentioned something I'd love to ask about, and that is not giving employees access to their higher level of authorities than they really need. And is there a system that is good to apply to that when you say, okay, it's fine, you want to be nice and you want to give these people access because it makes them feel good about themselves, blah blah blah, but there's probably a good methodology to apply to that. Is that something that is kind of in the can that you say, okay, here's the rule, or how do you apply that?
It varies widely. If you're in a Microsoft environment, the concept is called group policies. So you can set up group policies so that every computer connected to the corporate networking system allows and disallows certain behaviors. If you're running a smaller business, it requires a little more attention. But even for me, I run a small business that does big things globally, but I have about a dozen employees. Even on my own computer where I know what I'm doing, unless I need to, I'm not operating as the administrator of the computer. I'm operating as a limited user so that even if I click on something on accident in my email because I didn't know what it was, very little is going to happen. And so all the things that we're talking about are easy to implement, but they're practices more than it is throwing technology at the problem.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, there's something you told me a while ago that I implemented immediately. And it was that in Microsoft, you can go in and put a little banner on the top of every single email that comes in from an external source that says, this is an external email. And I did that at your suggestion after you told me that. It took me a little bit to find it. You said, oh, it's really easy. I did have to dig, I did dig through the help screen. But I that certainly was, I think, just very brilliant. And it's not the whole, right? Most of the people that access our systems are going to know what to do and what not to do. But it is just that one time when it is very well could be me. If something pops up, I go, oh, I should respond. Oh, wait a minute, that's external. It looks like that's coming from Lisa Cutter, our VP of marketing. And no, it's not. It actually came from outside of our system. So I thought that was brilliant, and we implemented that as soon as you suggested.
Yeah, for the audience, the technical term is just a warning banner, but it doesn't really matter the email system you use. It's not specific to vendors. It's another one of those concepts that's a practice or a procedure. You're already using the technology. Maximizing your safe use of the technology is simply a manner of telling all of your employees, hey, this didn't come from inside. And so if you get a message from the CEO that says, hey, wire this money to this location, if it has that warning banner, it's an additional reminder that this probably didn't come from the CEO. It came from outside. People have a flag that waves bright. My color for my warning banner is fuchsia, so it stands out immediately. But you see the fuchsia banner. Hey, Mark Galvin really didn't send this to the CFO to wire $50,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. We avoid a lot just by having a good practice and procedure in place for the company.
Oh, I think that's great. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break coming up here. But before we do, where is the best place for people to go to find you?
So you can send me an email. I answer all of my emails eventually. And so email is the best way to catch up with me directly. If you're interested, when you send the email, say you'd love to connect on LinkedIn, and I'll reach out to you. I have some security settings in place to cut down on spam. People can also go to my website, just www.class-llc.com, and see some of the fun things that we're doing. Plenty of complimentary information in the blog posts, lots of opportunities to do educational sessions where we're just educating the world and not charging them for it. Because the more secure the world is, the less I have to worry about for me, for my wife, and for my children.
Oh, I love that. Very nice. Well, folks, we're having a long conversation with Keyaan Williams from CLASS-LLC. He is a cybersecurity expert. We're going to take a break. Our shows are now hour long, and so we like to take a break in the middle of the show. And so we will be right back. So stay right where you are, and we will bring Keyaan back and ask him some more cybersecurity questions. 72% of people have found that if they post every single day on LinkedIn, they see a higher level of engagement and as a result, a better ROI. At ePresence, we encourage you to post every single day on LinkedIn. The challenge is finding content that you can share every single day. If you would like help with that, that's exactly what we do at ePresence. Let us know, we can help you. ePresence, social media solved. So welcome back to How's Your ePresence. We are so glad you are here today. This is part 2 of our show on cybersecurity. Our guest with us today is Keyaan Williams with CLASS-LLC. And CLASS-LLC stands for Cyber Leadership and Strategy Solutions, LLC. In the first part of the show, I didn't know that that was an acronym. So I am so glad that Keyaan was able to share that with me. Keyaan is the founder and managing director of CLASS-LLC. He is very accustomed to cybersecurity as he managed cybersecurity programs at the CDC. He's also the chair of the Cyber Strategy Retreat Advisory Board, has tons of experience. My greatest thing, my favorite thing to do is I sit down with Keyaan and I throw stuff at him. I just thinking of all these things. What about this? What about this? And in the first part of the show today, he talked about multi-factor authentication. You should go back and take a look at that. If you're listening to the podcast, go back to last week and catch the podcast from last week because he got into multi-factor authentication. We talked about what most people are doing wrong on cybersecurity and what is the number one cybersecurity concern. We also found out that Keyaan used to work at the Georgia World Congress Center and used to crawl through pipes like this big, maybe that big. Anyway, so you definitely want to go and check that out. We had a great conversation with him. Let's see if we can get him back on the screen. Where are you? Hey, there he is. Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
I am always so worried that when we take the break that my guest is going to leave, right? And I'm going to come back and say, oh, no, they're gone. I got to riff for 30 minutes. Well, I could probably do that. But with you, I'm glad you're here. I'd like to remind all of our listeners, our viewers, to do something. And that is, if you have a question, folks, Throw it right there in the chat box. We'd love for you to share where you're watching this, where you're joining us from. If you've got a question, slap it right in the chat box, whatever platform you're on, and you could become the host of today's show. So we would love for that to happen. It gives me a little bit of a break, and that's always I'm always looking for a break. I don't mind telling you. All right, Keyaan, you ready to get back into it?
I was born ready.
I love that. All right. So there's something you brought up with me in the past, which I thought was really interesting, and it was cybersecurity insurance. Is that something that a business should be thinking about when they're looking at what data breaches and other security incidents?
It's something that you want to think about, but it's not mandatory.
Okay.
What I would advise people is that if your business collects, stores, or handles confidential data like customer payments, credit card information, medical information, bank account information, you probably have more exposure than the average bear. Cyber insurance is going to be a good fit. Now, the caveat in all this conversation is that, in the first segment, and people hear it in the recording, if they're listening to the podcast, you might use a third-party provider like Quickbooks. Quickbooks has all that data. So as long as you're not downloading all of the account and bank information for all the customers as you're doing the transactions, that doesn't really mean that you have the data. The location of the data matters and the type of data matters. And those kind of work together to identify your exposure.
I like to highlight something you just said.
Sure.
You're just flying at 30,000 feet and you're moving
it's
at
all in my
700
brain.
miles an hour. You just said do not download the data from Quickbooks, because that way it's not on my local server. So I could view it on my screen. And so if I get used to just using screens, that's better. But as soon as I put that data on my local servers, that's a risk. I've never thought about that before.
Yeah, like I never download all my customer data. I'll download the contact information. I know who the contact is, who the company is. Generally when you're dealing with breach notification. So data breach by legal definition is unauthorized access or disclosure of personal information. Business contact information is not subject to breach laws. And so I'd have no problems if I'm only dealing with business contact information. Financial information exists in a different area, is subject to different regulations. And so if you download, like I know when I pay invoices in QuickBooks, I can add the account number and the routing number for the person that I'm paying. There's no reason for you to download that. And then QuickBooks has adequate security controls in place to protect it. So just leaving it where it is a good option. If for some reason my QuickBooks account got deleted, having a backup of just the first name, last name, the role, and the email address for the customers that I need to work with is good for business continuity. But if I lost their data, I could just call them up or send them an email and say, hey, I had an outage. I need to recreate the accounts payable database. Can you please, in a secure way, confirm the account number and the routing number when I'm making payments? And so being intentional about where sensitive data is a good tool to help you protect yourself. And that's not just my opinion, but even the Federal Trade Commission highlights that cyber insurance is one option that can protect your business against losses. Is not the only option. So you do want to kind of think about what kind of data do I have and where is it located? And do I have adequate controls in place to protect it?
Very interesting. I would have never thought about that before, about not download the data. And yeah, you can call clients, and they're honestly, I just sound like a operations nightmare to chase everybody down, right? But if you lose, here's something interesting. If QuickBooks loses my data, don't they have backup? They're backing up my data on their servers, aren't they? So if my data is lost, can't they recover it?
I can't speak for what QuickBooks can or can't do, but just thinking about business continuity in general. So if we pull away from technology and cybersecurity and we just look at emergency management, there were a ton of businesses that didn't come back after Hurricane Katrina, not because of the flood, but because they had no solution for backups. I
Huh.
think I heard in the news this morning that Ida, because of how destructive she was, that name Ida has been retired as a hurricane
Yeah.
because it's done enough damage that we never have to hear
Right.
from her again. But a lot of businesses that were lost after Ida weren't lost because of the storm or because of the flooding. They were lost because they didn't have good backup plans and they didn't have archives
Interesting.
of their data. So if I had my consulting hat on, I always advise people have a good backup of your customer list, have a good backup of your vendor list, have a good backup of the critical data that allows your company to operate, and then put that not in the next room in your house, but in a secure location that you can get to it. Because there was actually a situation where there was a fire for a small business that operated out of the home. You talk to the business owner and say, well, where is your backup? And they say it was in the next room. It got burned
Right.
up as well.
Yep.
Usually in larger organizations, when you do business continuity planning, the objective is to have geographic separation between the primary data and the backup. I mean, it was so intense in some situations where larger businesses might have a data center in Florida, but knowing that they're subject to hurricanes, would have a backup data center in the Northeast somewhere. And so maybe a blizzard takes out one data center, but you have a backup. Maybe a hurricane takes out a data center, but you have somewhere else to go. And the more resilient you need in your strategy, the more locations you're going to have the data. And so some companies actually have 5 or 6, or I've seen as much as 16 data centers, and things
Jeez.
fall over to other locations regionally. But these are also very large global businesses. The moral of the story is that even for a smaller business, a business that has 25 employees is based in one metropolitan area, it doesn't hurt to find the right cloud service provider or the right backup provider. I can think of a couple, but we don't want to turn this into a paid infomercial. But there are lots of solutions that exist in the marketplace
Sure.
that will allow you to store your critical data in a safe location so that if you have an outage or an issue, you can recover your data.
All right. So, as someone who does work from my home, I have backups here. So, if I'm going to put them off property, if I'm going to move them to a different geographic location, and I wanted to try to do that myself, how would you advise me to do that?
I'd talk to your accountant and make sure that you can write off the condo that you buy by a beach as a business expense. Um, the alternative, if your
What a
accountant,
great idea.
yeah, if your accountant frowns at you and decides that's not a good idea,
Dang.
cloud solutions are good solutions.
Okay.
Again, transparently, I have clicked on links that cause problems on my devices. Once I was traveling. I didn't bring any entertainment with me. I decided I was going to download a video game. I soon found out that the Russian writing represented that was not what I was looking for. So I just deleted everything on the device and restored it. But I had a good cloud backup. My outage lasted as long as it took for me to wipe the machine and reinstall everything from scratch. And so
Got it.
even though I had a security issue on the device, none of the data was on the device. It was all backed up in the cloud. It was easy to get access to that data once I reinstalled everything on the computer. Generally, that's going to be a good strategy for smaller businesses. If you're a larger business and you're subject to regulations, you're going to do more sophisticated things that cost more, but there is a solution for everybody out there.
Yeah, I love that. And it does sound like cloud services, if you're using multi-factor authentication, is really a good solution if you're doing that right. Is that an oversimplification or is that accurate?
I think it's an accurate statement. Again, for
Okay.
those of you listening to the recording, if you go back and listen to the previous segment, we did have a good conversation about how important it is to make sure your cloud solutions are configured properly. You probably want to do a risk assessment at least once a year, or if you have a major change, and individuals can perform a simple risk assessment. Is this configured right? Can I look in the logs? Do I see accounts that look weird that shouldn't be there? Are there weird things happening with data? Just periodically looking at what you have and making sure that it's set up the way that you intended is a simple person's approach for doing a risk assessment. If you have more critical data, you can hire an expert and they'll walk you through a very rigorous process that gives you confidence that everything is okay. With that said, I had one of the benefits of taking, I think it was 160 servers back then that the CDC had for one of their information systems. So
Yeah.
they have 160 servers in the data center that all work together to support something that we were able to deploy in the cloud. And in the cloud, it increased our connectivity because people globally could connect to
Sure.
the system instead of having to connect to the data center in Atlanta. It improved our resilience because if it goes down in one part of the cloud provider automatically failed it over to another region. And so there are a ton of benefits that come with using the cloud. I promote it, I advocate for it. I just say that my advocacy comes with a grain of caution, and you can't get lazy and assume that the cloud service provider is going to do all the security for you. What generally happens is that with cloud services, especially when you're dealing with cybersecurity, they have a concept known as a shared responsibility matrix. So the cloud service provider, whoever you choose to use, is going to say, I will be responsible for these things. Generally, the variable these things relates to the cloud infrastructure itself. They'll keep the
Right.
servers patched, the servers are updated, the underlying technology, the service provider will take care of. They expect you as the customer to manage access to the data that's in the cloud. They expect you as the customer to configure it properly, going back to our previous conversation about
Right.
HubSpot. And so you have a responsibility when you're using the cloud to set it up properly. But once it's set up properly, it adds a much more robust solution for security than most people could do for themselves in their companies for the same price that you're paying for a commodity service.
Yeah. Well, that's impressive. All right, so folks, we're in the second part of our conversation with Keyaan Williams of CLASS LLC. And CLASS LLC, I'm pulling this up, is Cyber Leadership and Strategy Solutions LLC. So it's a wonderful acronym. If you have a question, you can just drop your question right in that comments box. We will be happy to serve that up to Keyaan to see if we can stump him. And that's what the goal is today. See if we can find a way to stump him. And I've got a question that's going to stump him. So what happens because of the war in Ukraine if the Russians attack a cloud service in the US? Is that something we should be worried about?
Uh, if the Russians' target is a cloud service in the US and it's one of the major cloud services like
Yeah.
Microsoft or Google or Amazon, they're probably
Sure.
not going to be very successful.
Huh.
Those three, as the largest cloud service providers in the world, have very large security teams. I mean, their security teams go out and look for everything that could affect the business and their customers, and they provide responses and remediation in advance. Even for
Okay.
your smaller cloud service providers, where you get into products like your cloud based CRM or your cloud based accounting solutions, those companies generally are going to have a third party certification for their security program. They have dedicated security teams. They're usually going to be pretty resilient to an attack. And so, something like the war in Ukraine, when you think about Russian cyber attacks, it is more likely to affect an individual company. Not that Russia is looking for e-presence or CLASS-LLC to be a victim, but what is most likely to happen is that their attacks are indiscriminate and they just take a shotgun approach. They
Huh.
load the
Okay.
buckshot into the barrel, they pull the trigger, and all the little BBs hit everything that they're going to hit. Most people are going to be able to reduce the likelihood that they have any problems based on those indiscriminate attacks by doing smart things like removing the administrative privileges, patching the systems, not clicking on every email that comes in, and having a little bit of discretion. And then if you want to be a little more advanced, say for instance that you don't do business with anybody in Russia, there are things that you can do in the configuration of your network technology to say, I'm just going to ignore all connections to my business from Russia. If I'm a small business that operates primarily in Atlanta, yes, you could potentially lose customers by
Right.
blocking everything outside of Atlanta. The academic term is called geofencing. So based on the geographic location, thinking about maps and geolocation. Geofencing is going to set it up where you only allow traffic to come to your business from specific authorized locations.
Hmm.
But most businesses are not doing business with everybody in the world. They're like 230 something countries. If you count
Right.
every country, it's likely that maybe you only do business in North America. So I would set up my geofencing solution so that I only receive communications from Mexico, the United States, and Canada. We block
Interesting.
everybody else, but maybe we have a contact us thing on our website that says, hey, if you're interested in doing business and you couldn't get through us via normal channels, this is the way that you send a note and we'll reach out to you. Those kinds of approaches with the geofencing and the discretion and just having good practices in place are going to make anything that happens in Russia be something to pray about because other people are going to be affected, but is also
Right.
something that you can ignore because it's probably not going to harm your business.
Got it. Interesting. Good stuff. One of the ways that we've seen companies get impacted by rogue influences from Russia and other areas is ransomware. Can you do me two favors? Tell us, number one, what is ransomware, and what should I do if I'm affected either personally or in my business by ransomware attacks?
So, ransomware, by academic definition, is a type of cyber attack that allows the criminal to encrypt your entire computer system and then you pay a ransom to get the key to unlock the encryption so you can get your data back. The issue with ransomware is that a portion of the time, even though you paid for the key doesn't work. Another issue that comes up is that the FBI says don't pay the ransom. And
Right.
I spent a little bit of time with corporate attorneys. Um, I'd like to give a shameless plug for the Georgia Association of Corporate Counsel because they do great work and it's some of the leading corporate attorneys in the state of Georgia. But the Association of Corporate Counsel nationally, and even at their chapters in Georgia and other states, usually your corporate attorney is going to say, we're not going to pay a ransom because we know in advance that the money that we're paying is being used to facilitate other crimes.
Right.
And so when you look at the big picture, it doesn't make sense to pay a ransom if I know in advance that the ransom is going to be used for human trafficking or for terrorism or for something else. And so the best response to ransomware is to avoid it. And so you've set me up for success. In the previous segment, I made a controversial statement. In this segment, I get to make another controversial statement. And it's a factual statement that ransomware is preventable. And so then the best response to ransomware is just to prevent it altogether. There are standards that talk about preventing it. The National Institute of Standards and Technology has a document called NIST Special Publication 1800-25, and it outlines in very specific technical detail all of the things that you can do to increase the resilience of the configuration of your technology and to prevent ransomware. And I don't want to bore people with technical talk, but technically, the only way for ransomware to work is if you can complete the encryption of the entire device. And so if you stop that encryption process, ransomware can't take place. You don't get the ransom demand. And so then it really just comes down to,
because you did go technical and I want to go layman.
Okay.
You just said it has to encrypt the entire device. So if I see that I've been hit by ransomware, can I just disconnect from the network and save the network?
You probably can't do it fast enough. This is one of the cases where technology is going to help, but there are numerous technologies in the marketplace that when the bad guy tries to apply encryption to your device, the device automatically shuts down, stops the ransomware process from working. I know a lot of people that use it in cloud services. So some of your cloud providers have that technology. They have consumer versions of it. And so I thank you for saving me from getting too technical. I'm really not a technical person.
I didn't mean to stop you, but I was fascinated by that. What are one of the services or what is the name of one of those services that'll help block ransomware like you've just described?
PCmatic is a good solution. And I mentioned them because I know the owner and the founder of the company. They've been around for decades. It's not a fly-by-night company. They've been at this for a long time. And
is that how you'd look for PC Matic on the screen. Is that spelled right?
Yep, PC
PC Matic.
MATIC.
Okay, good. So PC Matic, I've heard of that, and they did some really interesting marketing. I remember seeing them on, and they were little scare tactics, kind of, but little used car salesman. But I remember it, so it worked. But so those guys are good.
Yeah, and they're not the only ones, but it's a good starting place just because of their history. They've worked in multiple industries. They've been around for a long time.
Huh.
You always want to be cautious when you're selecting cutting edge technology. One thing that I'll leave the audience with, because I know that we're running out of time.
Right.
Most companies that say that they do artificial intelligence are either uninformed or they're lying to you.
Either uninformed or they're lying.
Yes, machine learning is an actual thing, and that's often what's happening. But if you look at the academic definition of artificial intelligence, that's really not what the solutions are doing. And so I tend not to buy things that tell me that it's doing artificial intelligence. They're really just doing some good analysis and then making informed decisions at the speed of technology rather than a person trying to figure out what's the best way to solve a problem.
Got it. Interesting. All right, Keyaan, this has been very good. Great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all this cool stuff. I'm going to have to go back and take notes on stuff you said because there was so much there. Do me a favor. I know we did this in the first segment, but let everybody know, where can they track you down? What's the best place for people to find you?
I will respond to anybody who emails me. So Keyaan.Williams@CLASS-LLC.com. People can learn a lot about the work that my team and I are doing. I'm not a technical or a technology company. CLASS-LLC is really more of a strategy, risk management, and governance company. So for those of you who are business people and want to have a good conversation, I look forward to having one in the future.
I love it. I love it. Well, that's phenomenal. So we will put all that in the show notes here, but website class-llc.com, email Keyaan, Keyaan.Williams @class-llc.com. It's scrolling on the screen. I'll leave it up there through the end of the show. Keyaan, dude, thanks for joining us. This has been very interesting. I love kind of teasing out this stuff. You just scared the hell out of me, and so now I'm just not going to sleep tonight. So that's been that's really helpful. Thanks.
No, you can sleep soundly because a lot of people, my last shameless plug before we close, CISA, the Department of Homeland Security, is exhausting every resource that they have to protect the nation and the businesses in it. We have great people at the CISA region that includes Georgia. And for people that are elsewhere in the United States, they're really hardworking people that are just working on behalf of the nation to help us keep doing what we do so that they can keep doing what they're doing.
Well, I love that. And, as a matter of fact, I have a family member that is doing some work in the government. I tell you, they're throwing a lot of resources at this kind of work. Well, Keyaan, thanks for being with us, man. I so appreciate it. Hang out. I'd love to chat with you a little bit after the show, but I do appreciate you taking some time to chat with us today.
Absolutely. Have a great day, all. Thank you for watching, whether it's live or later.
So for the rest of you folks, thank you for joining us. I'm going to tell you what, I love always sitting and talking to Keyaan. As a matter of fact, he and I will run into each other and over breakfast, and I'm just throwing questions at him. It's almost like I interview him every single time I talk to him. Great guy. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Thank you for joining. How's your ePresence? This show is produced by ePresence, Social Media Solved. We are a full-service social media agency, and you can find our website at epresence.me. That's epresence.me because it's all about you. Is your social media generating leads? Does your social media management cost too much or take too much time? Well, that's where we can help you. We manage personal social media as well as company. We offer consulting and training. Recently, we added a very capable staff member in Lisa Cutter. Go check her out. She is an expert on the Facebook, Instagram side of things, as well as other spaces. So she and I complement each other very well, since I am a specialist on the LinkedIn side. By being a viewer of today's show, you should know that we offer you a discount on all that great stuff. All you got to do is go right to that link on the page right on the screen there right now, e-pr.me/listener. Go there. You get a 5% discount on all of our services just by going to that website link and throwing your information there. And or you can certainly just go to our website, epresence.me, and we would love to have a conversation with you. How's Your ePresence is everywhere. We're on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Wherever you are, whatever channel that you're sitting on right now, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. That subscribe button will make sure you get notified when we go live, and you can join us and throw a question at any of our guests. If you like podcasts, you're welcome to add us to that podcast, your favorite podcast app that you've got. To find out where we are, which is everywhere, quite frankly, you can go to our website, epresence.me/podcast, epresence.me/podcast, and you can find all the locations that we're dropping our podcasts. Until next time, for my guest, Keyaan Williams, I am Mark Galvin. Thank you for watching. How's Your ePresence?